What if the reason you keep losing arguments is not because you lack intelligence, but because you speak when power demands silence? Every conflict hides a deeper game, and most people never learn the rules. You have felt it before. That moment when words collide, egos rise, and truth disappears behind noise. In those moments, it is never logic that wins, but position, timing, and psychological leverage. Today, you are about to step into a forbidden form of wisdom, one that thinkers like Machiavelli understood but never taught openly. This video will reveal 7 genius comebacks that do not escalate arguments, but end them entirely by shifting the balance of power. Not with aggression, not with insults, but with calm precision. If you feel this message already resonates, comment the phrase "silence is power." Subscribe, like this video, and stay until the end, because the final truth may permanently change how you speak, listen, and dominate any confrontation without raising your voice. Long before arguments became public spectacles and endless debates flooded modern life, silence and measured speech were seen as signs of authority. In ancient courts, from Rome to Renaissance Italy, those who spoke the least often held the most power. Thinkers like Machiavelli observed that words are not neutral tools. They are weapons that reveal position, insecurity, and intent. Philosophy later echoed this idea through stoicism, which taught that reacting emotionally hands control to the other. Over time, this wisdom was buried beneath a culture obsessed with winning loudly, rather than mastering quietly. Today, arguments have become performances driven by ego, validation, and fear of appearing weak. Yet the wounds of our era, chronic conflict, fragile identities, constant outrage, are symptoms of this forgotten truth. The one who controls the frame of the conversation controls the outcome. The first truth you must accept is unsettling. Most arguments are not about truth. They are about hierarchy. When someone challenges you, interrupts you, or tries to trap you verbally, they are rarely seeking clarity. They are testing your position. Machiavelli understood that power reveals itself not in what you say, but in what you refuse to engage with. The genius comeback is therefore not a clever sentence designed to impress, but a psychological maneuver that collapses the other person's frame. A frame is the invisible structure of meaning that defines who is judging whom, who is reacting, and who is calm. The moment you react emotionally, you step into their frame, and the argument is already lost. The first comeback is silence paired with presence. Not awkward silence, not avoidance, but a grounded pause that forces the other person to feel the weight of their own words. When you remain still, make eye contact, and say nothing, you communicate something terrifying to the ego. I am not threatened by you. This works because most people rely on emotional feedback to regulate themselves. Without it, they become exposed, uncertain, and often retreat or over-explain, which weakens their position further. The second genius comeback is the question that turns the spotlight back onto them without aggression. Instead of defending yourself, you ask, calmly and slowly, why is this important to you? This question is not meant to be answered logically. It is meant to destabilize. It forces the other person to confront their own motivation, which is often emotional, insecure, or reactive. In arguments, people expect resistance. They prepare for counterattacks. What they are not prepared for is introspection. By asking this, you refuse the role of defendant and quietly appoint yourself as observer. Psychologically, this flips the power dynamic. You are no longer the one being evaluated. They are. Many will stumble, grow irritated, or reveal more than they intended. That revelation is the end of the argument. because once motive is exposed, the conflict loses its moral authority. The third comeback is agreement without submission. This is one of the most misunderstood strategies because it feels counterintuitive to the ego. When someone criticizes you and you respond with calm agreement, saying something like, "That's a fair point," without sarcasm or explanation, you remove all fuel from the fire. The attacker expects resistance to justify their aggression. When you agree, you deny them that justification. But the key is internal posture. You are not agreeing because you feel inferior. You are agreeing because you are secure enough to acknowledge reality without fear. Machiavelli saw this as a form of disarmament. A person who cannot provoke you, cannot control you. Agreement used consciously is dominance disguised as humility, and it often leaves the other person confused, unsatisfied, and silent. The fourth comeback operates at the level of tempo rather than content. Most arguments escalate because of speed. Words pile on top of words, emotions amplify, and clarity disappears. When you deliberately slow down your speech, lower your voice, and shorten your responses, you impose your rhythm on the interaction. This is not passive, it is authoritative. A slow speaker in a heated exchange signals control of self, and self-control is interpreted by the unconscious mind as higher status. You might respond with a single sentence where the other uses 5. You might pause before answering. This creates asymmetry. They invest more energy than you do, and energy imbalance always reveals who is trying harder. The one who tries harder is already losing. The fifth comeback is strategic ambiguity. Not everything deserves clarity. When you respond with something like, "Interesting perspective," and nothing more, you neither accept nor reject their claim. You leave it unresolved. This frustrates the mind that seeks closure and validation. Humans are uncomfortable with ambiguity, especially when their ego is involved. By refusing to clarify, you force them to sit with uncertainty. Machiavelli understood that clarity is power only when you control it. When you give it away too easily, you empower others. Ambiguity keeps you unpredictable, and unpredictability creates psychological distance. Distance is safety, and safety is power. The sixth comeback is emotional labeling without judgment. Instead of arguing facts, you name the emotional state you observe. You might say calmly, "You seem upset," or "This seems to matter a lot to you." This does something subtle and devastating. It reframes the argument from a battle of ideas into a display of emotion. The moment emotion is named, it loses some of its grip. At the same time, the other person feels seen, which disarms defensiveness, or exposed, which silences aggression. Either outcome ends the argument. You remain composed, factual, and detached, while they are pulled into self-awareness. That shift ends the power struggle. The seventh comeback is the refusal to conclude. Many arguments continue because one side desperately wants the last word. When you end an interaction with something like, "We don't have to agree," and then disengage mentally and physically, you reclaim your autonomy. This is not withdrawal, it is sovereignty. You decide that the argument no longer has access to your energy. Machiavelli believed that power lies in choosing your battles, not in winning every exchange. The refusal to conclude denies the other person closure on their terms. It signals that your inner state is not dependent on their approval, understanding, or surrender. That message alone ends most conflicts, because arguments survive only where there is mutual participation. What ties all these comebacks together is a single principle most people never learn. Arguments feed on reaction. Remove reaction, and the structure collapses. You are not ending arguments by overpowering others, but by stepping out of the psychological contract that keeps the conflict alive. This is why these strategies feel almost invisible when done correctly. There is no dramatic victory, no applause, no obvious domination. There is only quiet authority. And quiet authority is the kind that lasts. But there is a deeper layer still, one that most people misuse when they first discover these techniques. If you apply them from a place of ego, they fail. If you use silence to punish, agreement to manipulate, or ambiguity to confuse deliberately, people sense it. Power rooted in insecurity always leaks. Machiavelli warned that technique without self-mastery leads to eventual exposure. The true strength of these comebacks comes from internal alignment. When you genuinely do not need to win, when your identity is not on trial, when your sense of worth is not tied to being right, these responses emerge naturally, and that is why they are so difficult to imitate. You must also understand that not every argument should be ended. Some should be abandoned before they begin. One of the most advanced applications of this wisdom is discernment. Ask yourself, before engaging, what do I gain by responding? If the answer is validation, recognition, or relief from discomfort, silence is almost always the superior move. The modern world trains you to react instantly, to defend your image, to prove yourself constantly. This training creates exhaustion. Machiavellian wisdom offers the opposite path: conservation of energy, strategic engagement, and inner detachment. As you listen, you may notice resistance inside you. A voice that says, "But if I do not respond, they will think they won." That voice is ego, not truth. People do not remember who won arguments. They remember who seemed unshaken. They remember who stayed calm when others lost control. Over time, that memory shapes reputation, and reputation is a form of power that does not require constant defense. This is how arguments end before they even start. In the next part, you will go deeper into the hidden paradoxes behind these strategies, including why intelligence alone fails in conflict, how modern culture rewards emotional outbursts, and why silence has become threatening in an age addicted to noise. What you are learning is not how to speak better, but how to exist at a higher psychological altitude, where most attacks never reach you. To truly master these genius comebacks, you must confront a paradox that most people never resolve. Intelligence alone does not grant dominance in conflict. In fact, raw intelligence often becomes a liability. Highly intelligent people tend to over-explain, over-justify, and over-invest in being understood. They assume that clarity will save them. But arguments are rarely lost because of poor reasoning. They are lost because of poor positioning. Machiavelli observed that the sharpest minds often fall into verbal traps precisely because they believe truth must be defended immediately. This belief turns intelligence into a reflex, and reflexes are predictable. Power, on the other hand, thrives on unpredictability. When you resist the impulse to prove your intelligence, you remove yourself from the arena where most arguments are fought and lost. Modern culture intensifies this trap. You live in an age that rewards reaction. Outrage is praised, quick responses are celebrated, and silence is interpreted as weakness or guilt. Social systems are designed to provoke you, to pull you into constant micro-conflicts where your attention and emotional energy are drained. In such a world, the calm individual appears almost suspicious. Silence becomes threatening because it cannot be easily categorized or controlled. When you do not react as expected, people project onto you. They fill the void with their own fears and assumptions. This is not accidental. Psychologically, the mind hates empty space. When you create it deliberately, others rush to fill it, often exposing themselves in the process. This is where ego quietly sabotages most people. The ego does not want peace. It wants recognition. It wants to be seen as right, strong, or superior. Arguments feed the ego by offering a stage. Even when you win, the ego remains hungry, because victory achieved through reaction still reinforces dependence on external validation. Machiavellian wisdom does not aim to satisfy the ego. It aims to neutralize it. That is why these comebacks feel uncomfortable at first. Silence feels like surrender to an untrained mind. Agreement feels like weakness. Walking away feels unfinished. But these discomforts are symptoms of ego withdrawal, not loss of power. Another hidden layer lies in the illusion of moral superiority. Many arguments disguise themselves as ethical battles. Someone frames their position as morally correct and paints disagreement as ignorance or malice. When you respond emotionally, you accept their moral frame. When you respond with calm detachment, you quietly reject it. This is devastating to moral aggressors because their power depends on your participation. By refusing to argue on moral ground, you deprive them of the righteousness they crave. A simple response like, "I see it differently," without explanation, collapses their sense of superiority. There is nothing to attack, nothing to correct, nothing to shame. You must also understand the role of projection. In many conflicts, what the other person attacks in you is what they cannot tolerate in themselves. Your calm triggers their chaos. Your boundaries threaten their entitlement. Your refusal to engage exposes their need for control. When you respond with genius comebacks rooted in composure, you act like a mirror. People often react aggressively to mirrors because mirrors do not lie. This is why some arguments intensify briefly before ending. The other person senses loss of control and escalates in an attempt to regain it. If you remain steady through this phase, the conflict collapses under its own weight. There is also a timing element that few notice. Ending an argument is not about delivering the perfect line. It is about choosing the moment of disengagement. Many people stay one sentence too long. They sense the shift in power but cannot resist adding, "One last clarification." That final sentence often reopens the conflict. Machiavellian restraint means stopping when the balance tilts in your favor, not when the other fully submits. True power does not require total domination. It requires sufficient distance. Knowing when to stop is as important as knowing what to say. Another uncomfortable truth is that some people argue as a form of emotional regulation. Conflict gives them energy, identity, and relief from inner emptiness. You cannot defeat such people through logic, because logic is irrelevant to their need. The only effective response is non-participation. When you consistently deny them emotional engagement, they seek stimulation elsewhere. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. You are not responsible for regulating another person's inner chaos. Machiavelli understood that mercy without boundaries invites exploitation. Ending arguments is sometimes an act of self-respect rather than diplomacy. There is a deeper existential dimension here. Every argument subtly asks the same question, "Who are you to me?" When you rush to explain yourself, you answer that question from a place of insecurity. When you remain composed and selective, you answer it from a place of self-definition. You decide who you are before the other person decides for you. This is why these comebacks feel like identity shifts rather than techniques. Over time, they change how people approach you. Fewer challenge you unnecessarily. Fewer test your boundaries. Not because you are aggressive, but because you are energetically expensive to provoke. It is important to confront the fear that silence will be misinterpreted. Yes, some will assume weakness. Some will claim victory. Some will gossip. Machiavellian wisdom accepts this as the cost of long-term power. Reputation built on calm consistency outlasts momentary narratives. People eventually notice patterns. They notice who remains centered and who constantly erupts. Over time, the noise fades and only presence remains. That presence becomes your unspoken argument, one that never needs defending. Finally, you must recognize the ultimate illusion, that ending arguments means controlling others. It does not. It means controlling yourself. The moment you internalize this, conflict loses its grip. You stop asking, "How do I respond?" and start asking, "Do I respond at all?" That question alone eliminates most unnecessary battles. And when you do choose to speak, your words carry weight because they are rare, measured, and deliberate. In the next part, you will move from understanding to embodiment. You will learn how to integrate these principles into daily life, how to train your nervous system to remain calm under provocation, and how to overcome the internal resistance that pulls you back into old reactive patterns. This is where wisdom becomes lived reality, not just insight. To apply this wisdom in your daily life, you must first understand that ending arguments is not a verbal skill, but a nervous system skill. Most people lose control not because they lack intelligence, but because their body reacts before their mind has a chance to choose. The first practice, therefore, is learning to pause internally. When you feel provocation, notice the physical signals: tightening in the chest, heat in the face, urgency to respond. Instead of acting, breathe slowly and deeply, extending the exhale. This simple act signals safety to your system and prevents impulsive reactions. Over time, this pause becomes automatic, creating space between stimulus and response, where power lives. The second practice is intentional speech reduction. For 1 week, consciously say less in moments of tension. Answer questions briefly. Remove explanations unless they are explicitly requested. This trains you to detach self-worth from verbal dominance. You will notice discomfort at first, a fear of being misunderstood or overlooked. That fear is the ego loosening its grip. As it fades, your words gain weight. People begin to listen more closely because your speech is no longer predictable or defensive. The third practice is the mirror response. When someone challenges you emotionally, reflect rather than resist. Statements like, "You sound frustrated," or "This seems important to you," bring the interaction back to awareness without escalation. Practice this in low-stakes situations first. Over time, you will see how quickly emotional intensity dissolves when named calmly. This builds emotional intelligence not as empathy alone, but as strategic clarity. Another essential technique is boundary closure. When you sense an argument looping without progress, end it deliberately. Use phrases such as, "I've shared my view," or "We see this differently," and disengage. Do not justify the exit. Justification reopens the door. This teaches others how to treat your time and energy. Boundaries enforced calmly become invisible walls that few attempt to cross again. You must also train discernment. Each morning, ask yourself which battles matter and which are distractions. Many arguments are invitations to prove something that does not need proving. Declining these invitations is an act of maturity. If guilt arises, observe it without obedience. Guilt often appears when old patterns are breaking. Finally, reflect at the end of each day. Ask where you reacted unnecessarily and where you remained composed. This is not self-judgment. It is awareness. Over weeks, you will notice a shift. Arguments shorten, tension decreases. Your presence alone begins to regulate conversations. This is not because you dominate others, but because you have mastered yourself. And self-mastery is the rarest form of authority. What you have just uncovered is not a collection of clever lines, but a different way of standing in the world. These 7 genius comebacks work because they are not designed to defeat others, but to end the psychological game that keeps arguments alive. Silence, measured agreement, emotional labeling, strategic ambiguity, and conscious disengagement all point to the same truth. The one who does not need to react controls the outcome. When you stop feeding conflict with urgency and ego, it collapses on its own. This is why true power rarely looks dramatic. It looks calm, grounded, and almost invisible. If you look back at your past arguments, you may now see them differently. You were not lacking intelligence or words. You were giving too much of yourself away too quickly. Each reaction handed control to the other. Each explanation placed you on trial. Machiavellian wisdom invites you to step off that stage entirely, not to withdraw from life, but to choose when and how you engage. This choice alone transforms how others perceive you and, more importantly, how you perceive yourself. The most unsettling realization is this: arguments only exist where there is mutual agreement to fight. The moment you withdraw that agreement, the conflict has nowhere to live. Ask yourself, as you move forward, how many battles you are still fighting out of habit, fear, or the need to be right. And ask an even deeper question: who would you become if you no longer needed to win anything at all? If this message resonated, stay connected, reflect on it, and let this quiet authority reshape your voice, your presence, and your life.